Bom dia e boa tarde a todas e todos que nos acompanham no YouTube, seja em português, seja em inglês, seja no Brasil, na África do Sul, na Alemanha, na Áustria ou em outro país. Sou Rudolf Fonsina, coordenador do programa de pós-graduação em Teologia da Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Paraná e moderar este momento. Cumprimento o magnífico reitor da Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Paraná, professor Valdemiro Gremski, que muito nos honra hoje com sua presença e o seu sempre grande interesse e engajamento pela questão humana na perspectiva da ciência, da vida e da fé. Cumprimento o decano da Escola de Educação e Humanidades da PUC, professor Erickson Falabretti, quem também generosamente aceitou de estar conosco hoje, parceiro de sempre de atividades que visam o florescimento do ser humano, sua educação, sua inserção cidadã e a transformação para uma sociedade mais justa. Cumprimento os colegas representantes das instituições que copromovem o evento de hoje, pela Pontifícia Universidade Católica de Campinas, os colegas Dr. Douglas Ferreira Barros e Glauco Barsalini, pela Universidade de Edimburgo, Escócia, o Dr. Ulrich Schmidl, pela Universidade Católica Privada de Linz, Áustria, os doutores Andreas Telser e Lukas Kellin, pela Universidade de Stellenbosch, África do Sul, o Dr. Dion Forster, pela Universidade de Tübingen, Dr. Sebastian Pittel. Cumprimento todas as pessoas funcionárias, especialmente do marketing da PUC, pelo seu apoio solícito na organização e realização deste evento, especialmente nossos técnicos Mauro Chaves e Matheus Marcondes, e nosso tradutor, Dr. Luiz Marcos Sander. E cumprimento, de modo especial, nossa convidada de hoje, a reverendíssima arcebispa de Uppsala e primaz da Igreja Sueca, de tradição luterana, doutora Antje Jokelen, quem prontamente aceitou o convite para proferir a palestra de hoje, juntando em sua pessoa a atuação, o diálogo entre a ciência e a religião, a ciência e a teologia, bem como o empenho pela paz com justiça em perspectiva ecumênica, interreligiosa também, e também perspectiva intercultural. A arcebispa nasceu e estudou inicialmente na Alemanha, estudou e criou raízes na Suécia, onde também atuou por muitos anos como pastora em comunidades de igreja. Lá, ela elaborou e defendeu sua tese de doutorado sobre tempo e eternidade na igreja, na ciência e na teologia, sendo orientada por um teólogo alemão católico, atuando em uma universidade pública, num estado, então, luterano, o que me lembra, de forma encorajadora, da possibilidade de atuação de um teólogo luterano em universidade católica, num país maioritariamente católico. Em sua tese, a doutora Jokelen começa com uma abordagem narrativa, analisando hinos de igreja em sueco, inglês e alemão, quanto ao seu relacionamento entre tempo, eternidade e futuro, Deus e sua criação. Tendo passado por conceitos bíblicos, teológicos e das ciências naturais quanto ao tempo, a eternidade e a infinitude, elabora um conceito relacionalmente determinado e escatologicamente qualificado do tempo. Correlacionar a igreja, teologia e ciência, portanto, é um desafio, certamente, mas também uma grande oportunidade na Suécia como no Brasil e aliúres. Em seguida, foi professora e pesquisadora nos Estados Unidos da América e voltou à Suécia como liderança máxima da principal igreja do país, sem deixar do lado a reflexão teológica profunda que, como já pude testemunhar em outras ocasiões, alimenta seus discursos e ilumina seus ouvintes. Vossa presença, reverendíssima arcebispa, muito nos honra e aguardamos com muito interesse a vossa palestra. A palestra de hoje faz parte de uma série internacional de preleções sobre poder ao povo, ponto de interrogação, populismo, pluralismo e religião pública. Uma conversa global teológica e interdisciplinar, Série essa promovida pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação em Teologia da PUC, em colaboração com as mencionadas universidades. Tivemos uma constante presença de 8 pesquisadores e cerca de 20 mestrandos e mestrandas, doutorandos e doutorandas, e pós-doutorandos e pós-doutorandas das várias instituições, ao longo da série que começou em 1º de março deste ano e encerrará na próxima semana com a apresentação de síntese por 2 pessoas doutorandas e discussão final. Isto após 12 palestras de especialistas de diversas áreas. Essas áreas são teologia e ciência da religião, normalmente de tradição cristã, mas também muçulmana, filosofia, ciência política, história e sociologia. No centro da atenção estava a questão de como levar ao sério os anseios, desejos, necessidades e receios da população, procurando ser inclusivo em relação a este povo como sujeito plural do político numa democracia, sem instrumentalizá-lo numa definição unilateral de quem e o que seria o povo. Além do senso comum, há ricas contribuições teóricas e empíricas que dinamizam a percepção do populismo e podem sugerir caminhos para o reconhecimento de suas oportunidades e o tratamento adequado de seus perigos. Numa famosa conferência sobre populismo na London School of Economics, no final dos anos 1960, afirmou-se que um fantasma está atormentando o mundo, o populismo. Como é comum com um fantasma, ele é impossível de ser pego, mas é possível descrever suas feições e elaborar jeitos para lidar com ele. É isto que nos propomos na série de preleções e na palestra de hoje. Com a palavra agora, o decano da Escola de Educação e Humanidades, professor Erickson Falabretti.
Sander, por favor, acionar o canal do inglês.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. At this cold morning here in Curitiba, and in the second year of the pandemic. First of all, I would like to greet with a lot of joy Professor Valdemiro Gremski, the magnificent president of the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná. I would also like to greet Professor Rudolf von Zinner, who is the coordinator of the Graduate Studies Program in Theology of this university. And in behalf of Professor Rudolf, I would also like to greet Professor Ernesto, coordinator of the undergraduate course in theology of our university, and all colleagues and professors of theology. I greet very cordially, and it's an honor, the Reverend Archbishop Dr. Antje Jokelen. Now, I apologize in advance for not being able to pronounce correctly her name, but it's an honor for us, a great pleasure to welcome you here at our university through the Graduate Studies Program in Theology. And in the name of all representatives of the partner universities of PUC in this international series of lectures on the power of the people. I also like to greet all colleagues from all universities in South America, in Europe, and in South Africa. Good morning also, a very special good morning to the professors and students of the courses of our university. I also mentioned the course of theology and all other participants who are following this event through YouTube, be it in German or in English or in Swedish or in Portuguese. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Power of the people. When Rudolf sent the program, I looked at it, and then I revisited a text by the Archbishop that he sent about a toxic moment that we are going through. I assume she's going to talk about this. And I kept thinking, why should we discuss democracy, pluralism, populism, negationism, and related themes nowadays? Because these are topics of our times, and but they are not exclusive or contradictory topics, with the exception perhaps of negationism. But these are unavoidable topics that a graduate studies program that is doing research cannot fail to debate these topics. We are living in a time, mainly here in Brazil, because of the pandemic, because of the political environment. But this is not only the case of Brazil, where we have doing a rereading of the facts on the history and of science, a toxic time for the body and for the mind, in which the moment that we're living, we're even worse than denying or forgetting history or reality or science itself. This is a moment in which people are trying to poison these things. And when this happens, when we blur and poison history, we commit an even greater crime vis-a-vis those who have already been victims of violence, of history, and of wars. We take away from them even more than what they have lost. We take everything from them, even their memory, their right to truth, even their right to a science of the relationships. That's why I consider this debate to be fundamental, because it seems to me that this kind of debate or this kind of event or the research that we are carrying out around these topics, I think they counter precisely this latest and maximum degree of violence, which is precisely of the blurring and of the poisoning of reality itself, of history itself, and of science itself. So in this sense, the presence of Archbishop Jokelan and the event Power of the People is in profound agreement with the importance of the course of theology and the graduate studies program in theology of our university and its vocation to train religious leaders with a high academic level, with an international perspective of welcoming pluralism, the difference, to diversity, through ecumenism. It has shown a profound capacity for dialogue. So as the Dean of the School of Education and Humanities, I couldn't be happier to see at this point the course of theology to be so in tune, attuned to reality and to the moment, historical moment that we are experiencing. That's why I greet again all professors and researchers and students of this course and of the graduate study program in theology. I wish all of you an excellent event, an event that may bring to all of you a lot of inspiration to face and struggle against this toxic moment that we are experiencing. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you especially to the Reverend Archbishop, who is here to talk with us today. Thank you for your presence and your words, Professor Erickson. Now I give the floor to the magnificent president of the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná, Professor Valdemiro Gremski. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon also to all those who are following us. I greet Professor Dr. Erickson Falabretti, our Dean of the School of Education and Humanities of our university. I greet also Professor Dr. Rudolf von Zinner, who is the coordinator of the graduate study program in theology of the Pontifical Catholic University and a great leader of this event. And also greet very warmly the Reverend Archbishop Dr. Antje Jokelan, who will offer us this talk at this international conference. I would like to welcome you very much in our midst and would like to thank you for your talk. It is an honor to have you among us. I also greet and welcome all representatives of our partner universities in this international series of lectures on the power of the people. All those of you who are following this international meeting, namely the universities have already been mentioned by Professor von Zinner. It is an honor to have you with us. I thank on behalf of our university for all this partnership that certainly has enriched all of us in relation to this so important topic, the discussion of which cannot be postponed because of its profundity. It's necessary that the whole world gets involved in this discussion. I would also like to greet all the authorities from universities invited to this event. I also would like to greet the professors and students of the course of theology of our university and of all universities that are participating in these events and who are watching us through YouTube. Welcome to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank and congratulate Professor Rudolf von Zinner and the graduate studies program in theology of this university, as well as the undergraduate course in theology of this university, together with the already mentioned partner institutions. I would like to thank them and congratulate them for this pioneering and creative initiative of proposing an international program on the topic of the power of the people, with a focus on a topic that is very broad, complex, but that I consider absolutely a burning issue, absolutely relevant, and most of all, challenging. In this program, which is an international cooperation between South America, Africa, and Europe, discussing the concept and the reality of populism, as Professor von Zinner has already mentioned, in their respective contexts. The concept and realities of populism have been presented and discussed from a theological and interdisciplinary perspective, as was already mentioned. At the middle is the question of how we can take seriously, should we take seriously, how should we consider the fears, the longings, the needs of the population, with the goal of including them as a plural subject of politics in democracy, precisely avoiding one of the most dangerous risks and most poisonous risks, as the Archbishop mentions in her talk, in the title of her talk, without instrumentalizing them with a one-sided definition, absolutely one-sided definition of who is the people and what does it mean to be the people. So these are rich contributions which certainly will be elaborated on by Dr. Jokellen, whose conference will deepen this topic, focusing aspects that have directly to do with the advocacy of the citizenship of the people, which we see here as the population. She gives us a warning in her talk about attitudes that she calls poisons, but she also proposes and doesn't forget to propose remedies. According to her, all the poisons that have to do with this situation are driven by fear and are marked by a deficit of hope. This is very serious. It is important that these will be theological considerations for the digital age, focusing on citizenship. This is an encounter of theology with the digital age and having citizenship as its focus. Therefore, considering the moment that we are experiencing, a moment flooded by technology, just look at the presence in our everyday lives, for instance, of artificial intelligence, and have a series of other technologies. Therefore, it is essential that all this reality is subjected to theological considerations. Theological considerations with reflections on the spirituality of resilience, on coexistence, and on hope. As the Archbishop Yark says in her talk, Christianity is basically a religion that affirms science and accepts technology. Because the question is, how can digitalization serve these purposes? In other words, for those who look ahead, for those who are have their gaze turned towards the transcendental, only technology is not enough, is not sufficient. This is the great goal of today's lecture. What about us? What about education? What about science? What about the education of people in this environment? What about the university, whose values are based on pillars of science? Yes, but also on faith and on life. By the way, this is a hallmark of our university, our motto is science, life, and life, especially for an environment like ours, where our motto is Scientia, Vita et Fides, especially for an environment like ours, where the training of future leaderships must encompass topics of debate occurring from the realities that our society is experiencing. It's no use to avoid these topics, because these are topics that are facing and will first face on a permanent basis, and that have consequences on the country as a whole, including even its governance. This shows us that we have to take the stand of people who are proactive in this reality, trying to understand, trying to point to paths that must be expressed both in our process of education and in our presence in society. As a university, we can never take on a position of a subaltern institution subject to everything that comes from this new reality. We know that it is completely irreversible, but it must be studied, profoundly studied and discussed from a spiritual point of view. This is the topic of today's lecture, to be given by Archbishop Antje Yakalan. Theological considerations for a digital age. For this reason, it is with a lot of pleasure that our university welcomes at this moment Dr. Antje Yakalan, Archbishop of Uppsala and Primate of the Church of Sweden of Lutheran tradition since 2014. She is one of the best prepared people to talk about this topic. Her life story that has already been presented puts her in a position as the great apostle of the humanization of this revolution that we are experiencing. So be welcome, Reverend Archbishop. It is an honor to welcome among us, a scholar who is a leader of the internationally respected and awarded church for its activity and actions for justice and peace. Welcome once again, Archbishop Jokelen. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your words and your presence, Professor Valdemiro. We look forward with very anxious to hear the talk by Dr. Jokelen, but we try to contextualize the importance of the topic and of the event, and so that the Archbishop feels at home with us here at the Pontifical Catholic University, although her presence is remote among us. So without further ado, at this moment, I give the floor then to Archbishop Dr. Antje Jokelen to present her talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind welcome, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you also for the very kind introduction. And indeed, although being quite remote, I feel some closeness, not least due to the fact that actually 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, I was in Brazil and remember that visit rich in church experience, rich in ecumenical experiences, but also with an academic touch. So thanks again for this warm welcome. And as already said, I'm going to speak about 5 poisonous P's and their remedies, theological considerations for a digital age. One of the problems the world today is that it is drunk. In many countries of the world, too many people are sipping from a dangerous, intoxicating cocktail. I wish I could stop saying this, since I've been talking about this cocktail for several years now, and yet we still need to heed the warning. The cocktail is made up of 5 poisonous ingredients, all starting with the letter P: polarization, populism, protectionism, post-truth, and patriarchy. While the first 4 P's are rather modern phenomena, patriarchy has been around throughout most of human history. Nevertheless, patriarchy also develops a specific synergy with the other P's. They all are driven by fear and marked by a deficit of hope. Polarization tears apart whole societies as well as smaller communities. This happens via increasing income gaps, as well as gaps in education and health status. We see growing polarization between political blocs, between generations, and between urban and rural areas. All of this provides a fertile ground for populism. Populism draws its energy from pitting people against each other. Populists claim to be the voice of the people, which, according to populist narratives, is supposed to have just this one voice, a voice that speaks out against the elites. Populists often blame those they call the elites for having lost touch with the real people and pampering minorities instead. Those minorities may be as big as half of humankind, since some populist programs are opposed to gender justice, discrediting fair claims of justice and labeling them gender ideology. Populists also tend to put their own people above all other peoples, thus promoting nationalism. In the so-called Christian West of Europe, they urge the churches to become part of a nationalist, anti-Muslim, and beyond the surface, even anti-Semitic project. And if the churches resist, they are accused of no longer being Christian, but of having become political. Protectionism is one of the consequences of populism. It puts one's own group, nation, or country first at the expense of common interests. protectionist campaigns have become known to build on lies. Both Brexit and America First would be examples of this. Which brings us to post-truth. The insight that democratic elections or referendums can be won even though the facts are wrong and key campaigners are lying is quite shocking. If democracy is the way of governance that we want to promote and defend, according to moral standards, a person who is found out to have lied should be ashamed, confess, and do better. When a person found out to have lied instead displays shamelessness, proceeds with even more lies, and wins, some of the foundations of democracy are shaken. Because democracy can only work if there is some level of consensus on values, such as reasonably honest culture of debate, equal participation, respect of human rights, and accountability, not only to voters, but also to moral values. Patriarchy, finally, is a disturbing background noise throughout history. Although progress in gender equality has been made, not least during the 20th century, we hear about backlashes in many places. Societies and communities with gender equality do better than others. Yet there still is old resistance and even new resistance. Historically, faith communities are known to not always have championed gender justice and are not always promoting it nowadays either. On the basis of God creating the human person in God's image, and in the light of the Apostle Paul's word in Galatians 3:28, there is no longer Jew or Greek, there is no longer slave or free, there is no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. In light of this, objecting to gender justice is a deviation from Scripture in both Jewish and Christian tradition. Even though other religious traditions have notions of, even other religious traditions have notions of equality in their scriptures and teachings that all too often have been silenced by patriarchal patterns. Faith communities should see gender justice as part of their mission in today's world, because it's a win-win concept. There are ample data showing that its implementation is conducive to progress on many, if not all, the Sustainable Development Goals. Theologically speaking, counteracting gender justice and supporting misogynist practices in the name of freedom of religion or belief, as it still happens today, even in the context of the UN, is a sin. Drinking from the poisonous cocktail of the 5 Ps often leads to behaviors that manifest themselves as being against refugees and migrants, against climate action, and against equality and gender justice. In contrast, the Bible frequently talks about justice. Scripture talks about care of creation that has been entrusted to us, and caring for the stranger is at the heart of the biblical love command. The 5 Ps tend to promote static ideals, building on idealized glories of the past, like make America or make Europe great again, and keep women and men in their traditional roles. Theology, in contrast, can never be occupied with the past only. Throughout the Bible, God speaks to humanity in the language of promise. The language of promise turns our attention to the future, to the fulfillment of the promise and the consummation of creation. And this future is not to be understood as futurum, that is, the extrapolation from that which we already know. Rather, it is a future that needs to be understood as adventus, advent, arrival, It is about God coming toward us from the future. God is trustworthy in God's promises, yet God is also God of surprises, who wants to make things new and to make new things. Now, let us look at remedies and resources that can help us to deal constructively and effectively with the toxic 5P cocktail. We need strategies that counteract the potentially very devastating consequences of the 5 poisonous Ps. And I will suggest 2 series of antidotes, a C series and a T series, as it were, and you see on the table. And let us start with the C series. Since all Ps have a divisive edge, an antidote should have a uniting power. Where the Ps tear apart, the remedy should signal more of a coming together. In English, words starting with co, com, or con seem to be the right field to look into. The co and com, con are of course derived from the Latin com or cum, which means together, joined, common, at the same time, or even totally. So let's harvest the com field for the herbs that might have a healing power for a world that is afflicted by the poisonous Ps. The best I can think of as an antidote to polarization is concurrence, derived from the Latin curere, curo, to run. Where polarization keeps tearing apart, the counteraction also must be a process, namely the process of running together. Concurrence is at least about 2 things. On the one hand, it is about that which has been separated coming together again, like a stream of water that has been separated by an obstacle and forced into divergent direction, reunites and runs together as one again. On the other hand, it is about people who want to heal what polarization keeps pulling apart, running together. The running conveys a sense of urgency, well motivated by the state of things in the world. Concurrence also reminds us of the challenge that we need to run together with people who are not like us in all respects. The running together may have elements of competition, and not only of concord, but also of discord. We may sense that we strongly correlate in some respects, while we have very different opinions in others, which, by the way, is a hallmark of a functioning democracy, to run together and at the same time have the ability to compete for the best solutions. I call it to act from overlapping consensus, yet another con word, devoted to find common sense about what strengthens the common good. The best I can think of as an antidote to populism is community and coherence. Since populism draws its energy from pitting people and the so-called elites against each other, cultivating community is the path to take. Moreover, since populism lives from the proliferation of myths, like the myth of homogeneous nations and of religion as a marker of ethnicity, coherence also is a valuable resource. By coherence, I mean both logic and consistency. Understood this way, coherence is a tool that is helpful not only in debunking myths, but also in providing accounts that are more accurate in representing the complexities of history and of today. What to do about protectionism then? The first word that offers itself is, of course, cooperation. Rather than isolation and wanting to flourish at the expense of others, we need global as well as local solidarity, since cooperation. Only global cooperation will be good enough. That is the lesson the pandemic has taught us. As long as not everybody is safe, no one will really be safe. And yet cooperation around vaccines has proved to be so difficult. Therefore, I suggest that cooperation needs a partner in compassion. And here I'm not only speaking of compassion in the most familiar sense of the word, to be moved by the suffering of another living being, to act for protection, consolation, and healing. With compassion, I also imply a common shared passion, a compassion for justice, peace, and reconciliation. And what about post-truth? The word that comes to mind here is comprehension. It is a word that is rich in meaning. Comprehension indicates understanding, apprehension, cognition, intuition, intelligence, knowledge, awareness, imagination, discernment, wisdom. Thus, comprehension signals that truth is not only about facts against facts, as necessary as that is in order to counter so-called fake news or alternative facts. The antidote for post-truth must do more than that. It must reach deeper. Comprehension includes knowledge and insight in what it takes to know something, how we responsibly deal with contradictory statements, and how we relate to that which we cannot know, do not know. Comprehension comprises hermeneutical reasoning as well as checking the facts. Since I bring up hermeneutics, I would like to add a second co-word here, namely cogency. That is, the strength and force of arguments. As soon as hermeneutics is on the table, some people will sound the alarm of relativism. Postmodernism is mere subjectivity and relativism, or so they may fear. However, understanding the difficulties of understanding, which hermeneutics does, or attempts to do, is never an excuse for sloppy thinking. Knowing that we can and must communicate things that are beyond mere rationality is not a license to turn irrational. More than rational is not automatically the same as irrational. Hence the call for cogency as an antidote to post-truth. It is a central part of comprehension, even though comprehension fathoms more than the power and force of arguments. And finally, patriarchy. Since patriarchal structures continue to disenfranchise half of humanity of their full human rights, the antidote I advocate for this is commonwealth, literally understood as commonwealth. Common indicates that as long as patriarchy deprives the world of the full flourishing of women and children, it dehumanizes women as well as men, and in the end dehumanizes everybody. Wealth refers very concretely to the material resources that, overwhelmingly so, are in the hands of men. Wealth also refers to all the immaterial resources. It is only with a common wealth, both in material and immaterial sense, that we can move towards a future that is more sustainable than the present. And by sustainability, I mean economical, ecological, social, and spiritual sustainability, all those 4 dimensions. So much for the C series of remedies. as mentioned, there is a T series as well. It may seem like a coincidence that T cells, a type of leukocytes with white blood cells, are an essential part of the immune system. After all, it is the immune system of humanity that is challenged by the 5 poisonous Ps. And for polarization, there are 2 T antidotes: tangibility and tolerance. Tangibility is about touching. Tangible is that which can be touched. Polarization, on the contrary, is about driving a wedge between what belongs together and should be in touch, thus bringing it out of touch. Polarization is an impediment to touch, making it difficult both to be touched and to touch. Fostering tangibility, thus, is an antidote. It implies our willingness to touch and be touched, also by that which is strange and other. And this is where the connection with tolerance comes in. Without active tolerance, there is hardly any healing from polarization. A caveat here, though. In the context of the 5 Ps, tolerance must continuously negotiate the question, how much intolerance should tolerance tolerate? Populism seeks to capitalize on distrust. The remedy, therefore, is to cultivate trust. Trust is a soft and vulnerable thing, yet it is the hardest currency we can think of when it comes to the flourishing of communities and societies. It is not easy to predict how well trust will fare in a time when, in the wake of digitalization, a global surveillance capitalism is on the rise. Hence, I pair trust here with transparency. Literally, transparency means allowing light to pass through so that objects, or at least their outlines, can be distinctly seen, thus implying factuality. There can be no doubt. Things are clear and understandable for those concerned. This is the opposite of exploitation of personal data by anonymous algorithms. This kind of transparency clearly is a prerequisite for a functional democracy. So there was trust and transparency in the T series. If you could put it in the table as well. And then we move on to the next, the T antidote for protectionism. In the line of the sea of cooperation, this is about transcending and trading, namely transcending borders and trading goods and ideas in a process of sharing. From the perspective of Christian theology, we can see a connection to the incarnation. God transcended the most radical border, the one between creator and creation, became human in Jesus Christ, who engaged in that blessed trade, or the happy exchange, as Martin Luther described it in his The Freedom of a Christian from 1520. So no reason for protectionism any longer. Now, of course, the T antidote for post-truth must be truth. It is the truth that will make us free, as we know from John 8:32. Freedom is the hallmark of the gospel. It is also a hallmark of democratic societies and communities that prosper. The remedy for patriarchy in the T series is nothing less than togetherness. Here again, I want to refer to the Apostle Paul's great epistle on freedom, Galatians 3:28. What is realized in baptism, one body in Christ, without discrimination between Jews and Greeks, slave or free, male or female, remains our goal to achieve in everyday life. Thus, the C and T series point us to the one whose name begins with a C and ends with a T. Christ, the Savior and Liberator. Having said this, in the next step and the third part of this lecture, I want to apply these insights to the digital age, the age of the World Wide Web. And here we can stop sharing the screen. It is well known, and let me start my reflection on the World Wide Web with the Four-Fold Web of Relationality. It is well known that Genesis starts out with two different accounts of creation. Chapter 1 to 2, 4a, and the second starting from 2, 4b. The first one, which is considered the younger one and is attributed to a priestly tradition, is a testimony to order out of chaos. Its structure reflects poetic order with a refrain concluding the work of each day or period of creation, and with a main feature of God pushing back the powers of chaos and putting the order of creation in place. And it is good. From this account of creation, we have the crucial statement that humans, women and men alike, are created in the image of God, a principle that has found its reflection in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, and its first article that states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The first account of creation has also given us the understanding that humans should fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Genesis 1:28b. Often taken to mean humans are the crown of creation with the right to rule over and exploit the rest of creation. This thought of the dominium terrae was famously criticized by historian Lynn Wright in a seminal article from 1967 as the driver behind environmental degradation and the current climate crisis, one must add. The second account of creation is different. It's much more earthy, so to speak. And it's here that we find the four-fold web of relationality, which in my opinion has been vastly overlooked and gone unnoticed by many theologians. Let's take a look. The Lord God formed a human from the dust of the ground, from the Arama, Hebrew, or the humus, Latin. The human from humus becomes a living human being when God breathes the breath of life into those humus nostrils. This is relationship number one between God and human. Second, God puts the human into the garden to till and keep it. The relationship with the whole of creation is established. The message is humans are humans when they care for creation, when they're in relationship with that which grows, and when they cultivate, create culture. What happens next? The human being encounters a being that is closer in likeness than any other human being. The relationship to the fellow human being is established, the relationship to the neighbor. Fourth, and finally, they eat the famous fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden, and they discover that they are naked. The relationship to their own selves is established. It's a fascinating order. Relationship to God, creation, neighbor, self. Life is relationality. To care for life is to care for this fourfold web of relationality. Also, in the age of digitalization. So that's my starting point for my reflection on the digital age. The Christian tradition has been crucial in forming the value systems of those societies that for centuries have been at the forefront of scientific and technological development. Even in a globalized and more pluralistic world, we still see the influence of Christian tradition on the questions we ask, the qualms we experience, and the solutions we seek. Christianity is basically a science-affirming and technology-friendly religion, because whatever helps people to thrive, whatever alleviates suffering, whatever is good for the most vulnerable, is a sign of the realm of God. The question is how digitalization can serve these purposes. The enormous possibilities of artificial intelligence are accompanied by huge excitement, and rightly so. However, the greater the possibilities, the greater the need to ask critical and self-critical questions. What does AI do to our human self-understanding? Who is benefiting in the short run and in the long run? Who is paying the price in the short term, or in the long term? How will AI be good for the little ones, those who Jesus used to move to center stage, knowing that what is good for the little ones is often good for the big ones as well? In short, how does this four-fold web of relationality thrive in the era of the World Wide Web and in the age of AI? Ethics must be part of this discussion right from the beginning. It's not good enough to just follow the trail and call upon the ethicists only to fix the problems we inevitably will run into. If we want to build and maintain democratic societies that are good for their countries, for the citizens, ethics must be part of the whole journey. Ethics is a starting point and needs to be considered throughout the whole process and life cycle of an AI algorithm. And I think that theologians can be of help here. Via our methods, we are trained to connect the dots, bringing together complex issues and ethical reasoning over the long haul. In times of profound and rapid change, we must be particularly mindful of our history, because people who lose or deprived of their history also lose out on their future. Periods of great transition require spiritual resilience from individuals as well as from societies. And we know that we are up for some substantial changes. As the chair of one of the biggest Swedish companies puts it, for some time now, we have worked with the 10-50 rule, which means in 10 years, 50% of the things we are doing now, we will no longer be doing. This is indeed time for joint transdisciplinary reflection on how AI develops and will affect people's lives, societies around the world, and the planet as such. This reflection needs to come to fruition in the shape of comprehensive and widely accessible education regarding these issues. Otherwise, we might very soon find democracy under serious attack. What then should we be aware of? Digitalization and the development of AI force us to rethink common concepts such as trust, society, communication and manipulation, human relationships, work, death, personal integrity, and privacy. The shift in the labor market from more people means growth to more data means growth is momentous. In fact, we will ask anew, what then is a human being? And like Pontius Pilate, we will ask, what then is truth? We may want to distinguish between more down-to-earth issues and more abstract philosophical ones. The first category includes concrete questions, such as, for example, discrimination due to biases in data programs, the concentration of resources and power to Northern California, personal integrity, filter bubbles, military use of AI, and stress on the labor market. The second category includes conceptual questions like whether we can expect an AI that in terms of general intelligence will match or surpass human intelligence. When this will happen, whether humans may coexist in harmony with super intelligent machines, whether AI will reach the level of consciousness and annihilate humankind. The first kind of issues refers more strictly and directly to science, technology, and ethics. The second one relates more to science fiction, but also to philosophy and theology. From a theological point of view, they need to be treated as interlinked. Technological development is driven by the pursuit of perfection. In contrast, human creativity is driven by the experience of imperfection and finitude, combined with the imagination of a wholesome future. And this makes for an interesting tension. It is this tension that provides the soul of engineering with its energy. Will then AI and digital perfection level out this creative tension between imperfection and imagination of the wholesome, and thus extinguish the creative energy that fuels the very soul of engineering? Well, such a scenario is still quite far down the road. However, today's new forms and new scope of connectedness affect us, and we must ask, has evolution really equipped us to examine what thousands of people think of us? Which is what we do when we count likes on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. How then do we hold on to what we would say is our authentic self? How big a gap is there between our authentic selves and our digitally brushed up self-representation? And if that brittle social media popularity breaks down, what is going to fill the void? Software engineer Justin Rosenstein, who helped create the Facebook like button, says, when we were making the like button, our entire motivation was, can we spread positivity and love in the world? The idea that teens would be getting depressed when they don't have enough likes, or it could be leading to political polarization, was nowhere on our radar. Well, that good intention can lead to bad consequences is nothing new. It has been the case ever since the gates of paradise closed behind Adam and Eve. Yet in the digital world, the effects can keep spiraling on forever and ever without much of an opportunity to haul things back in and make them better. We've learned that social media technology impacts human interaction and self-esteem. This technology tends to reduce us to users and products. People are dehumanized and human dignity gets jeopardized. The technology that connects us so beautifully right now also manipulates us, polarizes us, controls us, monetizes us, and distracts us. Never has a small group of designers, pretty young white guys in Silicon Valley, had the power to influence how billions of us think, act, and live our lives. Technology is changing what you do, how you think, who you are, and constantly tracking the slightest changes. Surveillance capitalism emerges as a new kind of marketplace. The merchandise are we. It is a trade in human futures, to use Shoshana Zuboff's expression. Our attention as a gold mine, allowing our minds to be mined. Our human emotions and fears are monetized. We are turned into products, or as Jaron Lanier puts it in the documentary, The Social Dilemma, it is the gradual, slight, imperceptible change in your own behavior and perception. That is the product. End of quote. Constantly and freely, we share data about our most personal choices without control of how they are used. We are ending up in self-exploitation, as German-Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han has observed. It is the feature of self-exploitation that is so risky. Oppression of freedom provokes resistance. Oppression of freedom provokes resistance. Exploitation of freedom does not yet. Rather than getting together with others to act for change, the result of this exploitation is self-aggression. We direct the aggression against our own self. Big data can become an efficient psychopolitical instrument, intruding on a person's psyche without the person even noticing it. Total transparency, and note this is a different kind of transparency than the one I mentioned earlier as a part of the T series. Total transparency is mark of this development. The theological question to ask is, can total transparency as an ideal ever be reconciled with the experience of transcendence, which we have identified as a vital part, in fact, the first part of the four-fold relationality. When online connection is priority number one, there will be consequences for the four-dimensional relational web. Studies have found a significant increase in mental health disorders in teenagers that coincides with the introduction of the smartphone. The total number of teens who recently experienced depression increased 59% between 2007 and 2017. The rate of growth was faster for teen girls, 66%, than for boys, 44%. Those born after 1996 are more likely to have experienced anxiety, self-harm, depression, or the risk of suicide. One might say that we are moving from a tool-based economy to a manipulation and addiction-based economy. It goes without saying that this has implications for democracy. To put it bluntly, if the digital age were to be synonymous to an age of disinformation, democracy would be bound for death. Have we all become dependent on digital pacifiers? If we are reduced to being users and products or merchandise, democracy is indeed under attack. Citizenship then needs to be rediscovered. Rather than by consuming, citizenship is marked by participating and contributing. Its hallmark is dignity rather than value. Already in the design or concept stages of AI, the risk of bias is obvious. Self-driving cars and the moral machine experiment at MIT have demonstrated that ethics differs across cultures and groups in society. Who then decides which ethics should be guiding the development? Again, this underlines the necessity of working multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral, since AI developers rarely represent a diversity of groups and people nor are they ethicists. Another risk is that the technological development is so complex that few own it and understand, and at some point there may be no human at all who understands it. How then can we ensure that a particular AI is serving the greater good? How can end users have trust? Will we end up with an apartheid system based on AI? Here, the joint work in the European Union that goes by the name Trustworthy AI, based on fundamental values and freedoms, and the cooperation across EU member states is relevant. It is meant to help the EU to develop its own approach to AI development and application relative to China, with its focus on control of citizens, and to the industry-led development in the US. According to the EU, trustworthy AI needs to aim at a better society and better lives for all. AI, I think it's clear from what I've been saying, can easily add some further spices to this toxic cocktail of the 5 Ps. Relevant examples range from Cambridge Analytica and the attempts to manipulate elections, to the role of Facebook in the genocide against the Rohingya people in Myanmar, and Google's way of handling the Chinese censorship. Responsibility and accountability are not straightforward in these cases. Adaptation of legislation is required. Attention must be paid to ethics and trust. Anti-democratic uses of algorithms pose challenges not only to the scientific and technological literacy of the world's population, but also to its social, moral, and spiritual literacy. As hinted at before, trust may well be the ultimate currency for the future. The question of trust will be relevant to how successful we will be in putting AI to the service of handling the climate crisis, for example. We need AI development to be human-centric, or else we will be facing a dystopic future. I'm deliberately using the word human-centric rather than anthropocentric. Anthropocentrism has been a driving force in the exploitation of our natural environment, and thus instrumental in bringing about a host of environmental crises and climate change. By human-centric, I mean centered in humanistic values about human dignity and rights, and resolved to bring the four-fold web of human relationality to fruition. Relation to the transcendent, or what the majority of people on this earth calls God. Relation to God, to creation, to fellow humans, and our own self. For this to happen, we need lots of soft skills, but also laws and regulations to ensure that all technical development serve people and planet. The church has multiple ways of exercising its ministry in this context. It has a prophetic role in seeing and giving voice to those who do not benefit from the development. It has a diaconal role in supporting, listening, and helping. It has an ethical role in initiating and taking part in relevant conversations. It has a theological role in raising the questions that are rarely being asked and in providing a ground for a robust spirituality. So let me conclude by briefly outlining the theology and spirituality that will be important to orient ourselves in the yet uncharted realms of the digital age. I call it a spirituality of resilience, coexistence, and hope. A spirituality of resilience will enable us to make sense of the fights of women and men for the health, well-being, and future of their children. It is a way of again and again drawing God's mercy into this world with words and actions. Be it words of prayer and words of advocacy for human rights, equality, peace, justice, and reconciliation. Be it humanitarian help and support for development. With the theology of resilience, we will be able to confront the trends and powers that hamper our constructive engagement with the greatest challenges of our time. We will be able to confront polarization. We will be able to resist populism. We will be able to counteract protectionism. We will be able to fight against post-truth. And we will be able to overcome patriarchy. With the spirituality of coexistence, we will be able to revisit some of the borders that are harmful to our working and living together as one human family. We will be able to foster more adequate views of nature, and will listen to the groaning and longing of creation for the revealing of the children of God, Romans 8:19-23. And this will put us in a more effective position to address climate change in a holistic way. With the theology of coexistence, we will be more eager to hear the stories of those who are suffering and will be suffering from the degradation of their environments and livelihoods. We will be better at listening to the voices of indigenous peoples. We will care for the four-fold web of relationality and do it knowledgeably and wisely. With the spirituality of hope, finally, there is reason to expect change. Remember, I said in the beginning that these 5 Ps have their roots in a surplus of fear and a deficit of hope. Because underlying all those major questions of our time, for believers and non-believers alike, is the pressing question: what may we really hope for? And clearly, people of faith have a special vocation to respond in honest, empathetic, and intelligible ways, as 1 Peter admonishes us. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. And hope is different from optimism. Optimism builds on that which is already known. It gains its authority by extrapolating from trends that already exist, by reading the statistics right. And that is an important part, of course, of living an informed life. But we must remember that optimism operates exclusively with the category of futurum. Hope does more than that. Takes account and stock on what there is, but it also includes the perspective of adventus, watching out for promises. It transcends the purely rational without becoming irrational. And this, I think, this is the path we need to take, because this hope is also credible, because it can harbor, or let me put it that way, a credible hope must be able to harbor the frustration and the anger about that which is wrong. And it must have a sense of realism, of humility. Remember, humus, humankind, humanity, which is the sense of what is our vulnerability, but also our strength, our mortality and our creativity. And it, for third, has always a chance to choose the path of courage, because in most situations we end up as human beings, we still have, even if it's a small one, but a choice to choose the path of courage. So the path of hope is what we need to take in looking for and finding a humanistic home beyond a 5P world in the digital age. And I hope we will do that. Thank you for listening.
Muitíssimo obrigado, arcebispa.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Yakalen, for your rich and perceptive talk, perceptive in relation to what we are facing in terms of challenges. It was very didactic in presenting the 5 Ps with their remedies in the 5 Cs and the 5 Ts. So it's profound in its theology that you present to us. One of the highlights that occurred to me was the emphasis that you put on the relationality, on relations, something that is very important here in our country, including even the touch, the embrace, the profanity, perhaps even more than in Sweden. But it's very important here because we suffer a lot due to the absence of touch, due to the absence of embrace, due to the absence of proximity, of closeness. We could also bring together 2 more P's, which is poverty, which is increasing very clearly in our country, as we read this morning in the paper, and pandemic, evidently, which is also prevents us from encountering, and it prevents us either from carrying out 2 of the C's that in our relationality and our parties or feasts are very important, which are an alcoholic cocktail, but non-toxic, which is caipirinha and churrasco, which is an alcoholic beverage, and a churrasco is a barbecue where people get together and as a group. So it's important to mention all these 2 C's. Now, it is very late, and because of the strictness that we have to hold in online transmissions, broadcast, we have no time for questions and answers. But in YouTube, the recording of your talk will be available in the 2 languages in YouTube. We have gathered the questions and comments. I am going to translate them and send it to you so that you can see what were people's responses. People sent to the chat, and we continue discussing these questions also in our series of lectures, particularly in the last session, which take place next week. And perhaps also in the classrooms of our university and of other institutions whose professors and students participate in this live session. There will also space to discuss about the instigating questions that Dr. Yakalen raised for us. So in this way, I would like to conclude my part, but I would also like to invite Professor Valdomiro, who is also with us, our president, to say a final word in the name of the Pontifical Catholic University. And meanwhile, goodbye to Archbishop Yakalen, and mentioning also before President Valdomiro talks that he has also a connection with Sweden that he mentioned. He spent a few years there, how he is able to say his own words of goodbye in this context. And I thank to all of you who were present, also to the interpreter who did an excellent work, and to our technicians, Mauro and Marcelo, and Mateus, sorry. Thank you very much, Professor von Zinner. I would like to thank Reverend Archbishop Antje Yakalen for her beautiful talk, for her beautiful lecture, which was profoundly human and humane. She really tried to look at human beings from the point of view that Christ used a lot in the Gospels, which is the point of view of the neighbor whom we have to love. We should precisely love everyone. And in this sense, precisely this all includes the power of the people. So once again, taxomikit for your presence, for your so significant presence, and for this, and appreciate your ability to establish this relationship between theology, spirituality, and all this movement that is taking place in the world. And we are in the midst of it. And we really have to drink from this wisdom. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you again, dear Reverend Archbishop Jokellen.
Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket.
Friendly words. It was an honor and a pleasure to be with you. And yeah, I do hope we'll meet one day or another, also in physical space, not only in digital space.
Ok, já estamos.